Good morning, YouTube. It's Ryan back with another video. This one should be a little bit more quick than the usual video just because there's not much to go into this one. The primary focus on this video is explaining an addendum of contract and when and why it's needed. I have a lot of people that I work with, specifically wholesalers. They think that you can just make whatever change you want, and as long as everyone verbally agrees, then it's fine. Something as simple as them typoing who's paying the closing cost. They could say, hey, seller's paying the closing cost in writing, but then telling the seller, like, hey, we're going to cover the closing costs. And then the seller just signs. It happens all the time. So really the main purpose of an addendum of contract is to make a change or an addition to the already existing contract. So you don't, if you already have a purchase and sale agreement between the parties and you need to make a change, like speeding up the closing date, extending the inspection period, changing your buyer, all those things would go into here. So I'm going to kind of fill this out and show you guys what an example of, the right way to fill out an addendum of contract. So you always start with whatever number addendum this is. Usually, hopefully, you don't get past 1. So addendum number 1 to the contract with the effective date of. And now this is where you would choose the effective date. So we're just going to say it was May 6th. Between the seller, so seller, John, whatever his first and last name is, and buyer, we'll just say Ryan Natali. Concerning the property as described as. So right here you can enter legal description, address, whatever you want. I've always done ABC Street, the address. So we're just going to make that up. 123 ABC Street, Cape Coral. All right, and then now down here, this is where you make your additions, your changes, whatever. So, and I like to number them. For me, you don't necessarily need to number them. I just like to. So addition number 1, we would say, let's say we had a 30-day inspection period. Buyer is waiving the inspection period. Buyer agrees to move closing date to on or before 5/20. Okay, so you can make a change like that, changing the closing date. 3, let's say we found owls on the property or turtles or whatever. Maybe seller agrees to reduce purchase price from $20,000 to $15,000 to cover those expenses. You show them proof in the report. You can literally almost make any kind of change to the contract. You don't want to. The main thing is you don't want to rewrite the contract in here. So if you sent out a bad contract for whatever reason, you really want to dial in on what you're doing in here, and you don't always want it to be in your favor. So buyer waiving the inspection period, that's something in the seller's favor. Like, hey, we had a 30-day due diligence period. After 3 days, we decided, hey, we don't need that anymore. If you as a wholesaler, if you assigned the contract and your buyer doesn't need due diligence and they want to close sooner or they want to change the title company, you can make those kind of changes in here and always put the ones that benefit the seller first. So, another one could be changing closing location from X title to Z title. So now one other thing to keep in mind is when you're changing things in the original contract between you and the seller, both you and the seller would need to sign. But if you're just making changes between an assignment, a contract, and you're making changes between the assigner and the assignee, then those two need to sign. So you would sign as the seller, and your buyer or the assignee would sign as the buyer. So those kind of things really matter, and understanding that, hey, you can't just do a verbal change to a contract or expect people to know exactly what's going on. And now once this is signed, then what you do, it needs to be signed by both parties to be an effective contract or an agreement. This becomes attached to the original now, and then what happens is you would just send it over to the title company. So you would definitely want to send it to the title company as soon as everyone signs. And yeah, that's pretty much it for an addendum. You just use it for changes or additions or even clarifications too. you can always clarify things, because sometimes contracts aren't super spelled out, and again, you agree on things verbally, but not everyone agrees in writing. It can really clarify some things. So if you, let's say for example, you and your buyer agree that the buyer is going to pay 100% of the closing fees, but then you look at the contract and it just says buyer's paying closing costs. Well, there's still other fees associated with the closing, like a wire fee, doc stamps. There's all these different, I've seen technology fees. You'll have all these different fees that go into a closing that aren't necessarily considered closing costs. They're just closing fees, you know? So like a closing cost, standard closing costs are your title fee, title search, title insurance. Those are your standard closing costs. But like other fees can be doc stamps, technology fees, wire fees, notary fees, all these different fees. If the buyer is agreeing to pay 100% of it and your original contract doesn't state that, you would want to send them an addendum as soon as possible that buyer agrees to cover 100% of all closing related fees. And then you can even put something in there, seller to net $20,000. So that is as clear as it gets, seller to net $20,000. If you say something like that, there is no questions about who's paying what, because the seller is netting $20,000. So if there's back taxes on the property and you didn't do the proper due diligence, seller's still netting $20,000. So I guess with that being said, let me cover one more thing that I've done. Is when I make that agreement to a seller to net $20,000, I will say minus any owed taxes or liens against the property or against the subject property. So now what that does is that tells the seller, hey, we're going to cover every single fee associated with closing minus your owed taxes and your owed liens. And that's a good way to protect yourself, because if you agree to cover someone's liens, we've done a deal before where the purchase price of the property, it was $25,000 and the people, they owed $17,000 in liens, not taxes. They owed like $4,000 in taxes, but they had like $17,000 in liens. It was crazy. But if we would have agreed to pay them just a net number, we would have been on the hook for all of those costs. So it's definitely something that you don't want to do, and you want to always make sure you're protecting yourself and using addendums in the right way to clarify contracts. But that's pretty much it for this video. Thanks for watching.